Hello, I'm Peter Clegg. This is 8 Oakfield Street. This is a typical late Victorian mid-terrace house. When I purchased it in 2005, it was in a terrible state. There was no insulation, no proper heating source. So now let's go inside and look to see what I've done to improve the insulation of the house and reduce my energy bills. We're in the hall of the house. We come through the front door. As you can see, it's a wonderful stained glass door which I wanted to keep. So this door has not been double glazed as other doors and windows have been in the house. So what I've put here in place is a large curtain that is thermally lined. Also note that throughout the house lots of the radiators are on internal walls. That means the heat that's coming out into the room and also behind the radiator is actually heating the fabric of the building, and I'm not wasting the heat on external walls. We're upstairs now. In a typical Victorian house this would be a very dark upper hall. So what I've put in, you can see up there, is what's called a sun tube. This brings in natural daylight and naturally floods this area with light, meaning that I don't have to have electric light bulbs on a lot of the time. Certainly in spring and autumn it's very, very useful. Next to it you can see a plate. This is the input for the house's positive input ventilation system. I will talk a little bit more about that later, but basically I'm bringing in air from the outside through the roof into the house. There's about 20 air changes a day through the house, because I've insulated it so well to allow the house to still have breathability, to be a pleasant environment for us humans to live in. Bringing in the air from outside is really important. It has other advantages, and when we go in the bathroom we'll talk about another one then. So now we're in the bathroom, which comes straight off the main hallway. Conventionally, when we have a bath or shower, one of the things we do afterwards is open the window to let the moisture content out. I don't need to do that in this house. I can keep in the winter months the window closed, because the heat within the water, the steam, I want to use within the house. I don't want to waste that heat. With the positive input ventilation system, changing the air 20 times a day is taking that air and moving it around the house. What's also important is the moisture is also being used around the house. Quite often with central heating, our houses are too dry. So again, bringing that moisture into the air with that extra heat allows the house to be a warm and well ventilated house. In the bathroom, the towel rail has its own separate controller, its own separate timer. What that means is that in the spring and autumn, when maybe I don't want the central heating on and the hot water system isn't on, I can still add some heat into the bathroom first thing in the morning, last thing at night. Slightly takes the temperature off the air in the room, but also gives some warmth to the towel. We're now in the back of the house. In Victorian terms, this is the part of the back extension, and traditionally it's a very cold, damp part of the house. When I moved into this house, it was mouldy. People had used fiberglass and to keep the damp out behind the skirting boards. They painted black mastic on the walls. They've done everything possible to keep the moisture content out from outside. So what have I done to improve that? On the walls, this is thermoline board. This is plasterboard with a level of insulation behind, dabbed on the wall. It's dabbed off the wall about 5 to 6 millimeters to leave an airflow behind the wall. I've replaced the mortar on the outside. Victorian houses predominantly built with a lime mortar. That's breathable. That means as it gets wet in the winter, the wall needs to breathe. So dabbing the thermoboard from the wall allows there to still be an air layer between. It also adds to the insulation. This has had a big impact, putting this on the outside wall, not only upstairs but downstairs in the kitchen, on improving reducing, I should say, the heat loss through the walls. Now on the ceilings, because these are low ceilings in these houses, I need to find a way of insulating the roof cavity without reducing the ceiling height too much. And I've done that using this multi-foil insulation. There's 19 layers here of reflective material as well as insulation material. This has an incredible U value of 0.19. It's also thin, only 25 millimeters thick. It is put on the, I took the plasterboard off that was there, the old plaster came off the ceiling, and then this is put on the joist and then plastered over with conventional modern plasterboard. I've also double glazed throughout the house. I'm very concerned about how the houses look. I like the Victorian housing, the way it was built, and so I've used the old sash window boxes but created new wooden windows that go in them, and these are double glazed, again reducing the heat loss. I've retained the original wooden floors in the house. I haven't carpeted over them. I like the look and the feel that the wood floors give. What I've done is I've insulated underneath with rock wool. I've also done the same thing up in the loft space between the joists. What that also gives me, using rock wool, is a level of acoustic insulation as well. So upstairs I insulated under the floor using rock wool, but downstairs I used foil back insulation board. That's also between the joists. Traditional Victorian houses would have suspended wooden floors. It's really important that the airspace under those floors is maintained for breathability and health of those wooden floors, so that wet and dry rot doesn't occur. I've done that. I've cleaned everything out. When I moved into this house, these floors were rotten, they smelt, and they had sunk by several inches. All of that was taken out. The new joists, the new rafters were put in and rebuilt up. I also noticed that there's a lot of builders, electricians, plumbers' detritus under the floor that had bridged the damp-proof course. All of that was removed, so it's now nice and dry and clean underneath. So under the wooden floorboards is wedged the foil back insulation board that's hung under the floorboard. It's about 70-80 millimeters thick under all of the downstairs floors. I use that rather than rock wool being rather floppy, as you've seen. The rigidity of the foil back boards is easier to put within the joists. Also downstairs, notice again the radiator on the wall is on an internal wall. Again, I'm not heating the outside walls for the air to go out. Again, in a Victorian house, lots of the rooms were very, very dark, requiring us to have our electric light bulbs on. Even though I'm using modern eco-friendly bulbs, in many places LED bulbs, nevertheless I prefer not to turn the lights on if I don't need to. So all I've added in this space here is a very, very large Velux window, as you can see, and it brings in lots and lots of light. Not only on this sunny day, but on other days in midwinter, the light just floods into the room and the back room, so that I don't need to use artificial light. I've got natural light. Now the wedge created by putting the Velux in on the roof allowed me to have a space where I've used a traditional clothes dryer. The heat gathers there, as we know heat rises, and it gathers in the top end of that wedge. It's brilliant for drying clothes. So I'm getting an additional byproduct from the way in which the house has been designed and organised. So as I said before, when I moved into this house, it had a terrible condition. Its EPC value would have been 1, the lowest possible that you could get. What would be more typical for this house in its state would be an EPC of 24, just between the G and the F band. As you can see here, this is a list of all the things that would be recommended for me to do on this house to improve its insulation and lower my heating costs. What we've actually achieved, the insulation measures that I've taken in this house, we've now got an EPC of 63. We're up to band D. That's very, very good for this type of house. I could improve it still further by adding PV panels on the roof, which I might do as a future project. But currently, with the Parts of the project that I've achieved so far, we've moved from 124 up to 63. And as you can see, the recommendations for further improvement have been reduced considerably. There are lots of books on the market how to restore Victorian houses. If you're really interested in doing that, I suggest very strongly have a look at these books. We're now outside. We're going to look at the lean-to that I've had built on the side of the house. Within the lean-to, having had the lean-to built onto the side of the house, a laminated roof, gives me several advantages. I grow lots of vegetables in this very productive garden. It allows me to start growing the seedlings earlier in the season, and then once they've been grown and moved outside, tomatoes, aubergines can be grown inside. It's a real heat trap. Additionally though, in the winter months, what it's also doing is protecting the window and the door from the outside elements and the cold. So it might have reduced my heat loss, not only through the wall but also through the window and the door here. On top of that, if it gets too hot in the summer, and now we're in May, the temperature in here is over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, what that allows me to do is open the window into the house. The heat then is transferred into the house. I'm collecting the rainwater from the rear roofs of the house. As you can see here, there's 5 rainwater butts. That's 500 litres of rainwater that I've collected. I use that watering the garden. Almost invariably, even in the dry summer, I do not have to use tap water. This is a very productive edible garden. Small kitchen garden, a terraced house. One aspect of that is having a wormery. I don't have room, I don't think, for a compost bin, but my kitchen food waste can come into the wormery, producing fantastic rich compost for me to use within the garden. I also get the byproduct of what is loosely called wormweed, the liquid that comes out, which I can then mix with water and water onto the garden plants. It's almost like a concentrated baby bio plant feed. Small Victorian garden would be limited for space if I just grew at ground level. So what I've done is I've added hanging baskets into the garden. I've had fun by adding old chimney pots, which I've obtained from not only my house when I renovated it, but also my neighbours' houses, to grow pots in, to add not only colour with the flowers, but also vegetables are growing into the pots. So as you can see, I use lots of containers in the garden. That allows me to move them around the garden as the sun moves round, or I'm growing different things within the pots. The fireplace that I took out of the upstairs back bedroom, I've installed in the garden. It gives me a mantelpiece to put additional pots on. Underneath, pot growing Swiss chard and winter lettuce. The cold frames here, I've just harvested the winter salad crops and veg out of there. They're ready to be replanted now with the summer and autumn crops that I'm going to grow. I'm using Permaculture Design principles in the garden. It's run on organic and biodynamic lines. I'm incorporating lots of different disciplines into my food growing in this garden. As you can see, I've got more hanging baskets here. Quite often these grow nasturtiums, black fly like those, which means the black fly keep off my broad beans. Here I've installed a float form. Very small water feature, but it adds natural energy into the garden. Behind it is a Herefordshire apple tree. It's a Herefordshire russet. These are black currants here, which are growing. There's a rhubarb tree. There's a late winter broccoli just coming out, which I'm starting to harvest. Lots and lots of different things happening in the garden. Lots of creatures love the garden, lots of birds come into the garden. They're eating the bugs and the pests. So I'm attracting lots of hoverflies, lots of bees, lots of wasps into the garden as natural pollinators. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the short tour of this house and inspired to do work on your house, or maybe it inspires you to think about the house that you live in and what projects and what you could do to improve the insulation qualities of that building. The house will be open for Cheltenham Green Doors later in the year, and I look forward to welcoming you there, and if you've got further questions then I'll be happy to answer them.